To see you again, Jack.
Lily, return to me.
This isn't about ratings anymore.
No one's going anywhere. It's profoundly disturbing and shocking. You get out there, Mr. Midnight, and you knock him dead.
Hello again, everybody. Welcome back to the Rantin Review Entertainment. We're taking a look at a movie that has been talked about for a while. I finally got around to watching it. It is called Late Night with the Devil. It is a horror film that's kind of a period piece / found footage film style, but don't let that deter you if you're not into found footage films. This is a very unique project with an idea. It's one of those ideas that is something that you kind of go, why didn't anybody do this before? The premise of the movie is that it is a late night talk show set in the 1970s, and it is featuring the host of which is Jack Delroy, who is kind of a Johnny Carson-esque character. In fact, he is chasing Johnny Carson in this universe. Of course, for those of us who are probably older than the age of 35, y'all remember Johnny Carson was the king of late night television before Leno, before Letterman, before whoever else is out there these days, Jon Stewart, any of those guys. It was Johnny Carson. He was the gold standard. And Delroy, who did have some success in the late night genre, always fell just short of Carson, and that would play a role in the rest of the story. We find the movie starting off with this kind of montage of the 1970s, which is something, a personal note, I have recently watched CNN's Decade series, which is an outstanding series, by the way, which I should probably review on the channel at some point in time. But the 70s edition of CNN's The Decades documentary series, you come away, or I came away with it, really noting that the 1970s was a very dark period of time. I even mentioned this to my mother. I was like, what was it like during the 70s? Because I was born in the late 70s, and I don't remember any of it. But going back and looking at some of the documentaries about it, a lot of serial killers. A lot of the serial killers we know today, Charles Manson, Ted Bundy, et cetera, were very popular, or not popular. Well, they were popular, unfortunately, and that's kind of playing into the theme of this movie. But there was a lot of that going on in the 70s. There were a lot of very dark, mysterious things going on in the 70s. There was a lot of Satanism going on in the 70s, along with all the other distrust. Media was starting to broadcast a lot more stuff on television in the 70s with Vietnam, with a lot of the crime, with a lot of the racial unrest in the 70s that kind of, after the civil rights movement hit this kind of wall where there was just a lot of violence as humanity, especially the United States, was trying to deal with this new world. So the very turbulent 1970s, which is a period of time I'd probably never would want to go back to except for the music, is the background setting of this whole thing. And they do tap into that whole period of time and a lot of the real kind of demonic things that were going on and that were kind of pop culture-esque at the time. Now, the premise of this movie is that Jack wants to get this big Halloween show because it's sweeps week, and as some of us know from some of my other channels, ratings are a big deal, and Jack wants to beat Carson. He wants to be the number one. We also find out that he has some associations with this group that's kind of, it's a playoff of something that's actually in reality, which is a group of men, mostly men, I guess it is these days, that have this secret club, and all of these are all politicians and performers and musicians and artists and singers and all, basically very CEOs and very rich and powerful and famous people are all part of this cult. In this movie, they call it The Grove, which is, again, like I said, based on something in the real world. There's a lot of speculation about these people being involved in the Illuminati. You've probably heard about this with Jay-Z, and probably some stuff is going on with Diddy right now and former presidents and all this other stuff. But anyway, we get to that little bit of backstory about Jack, that he has been part of this group. On this night, after he had some success with his show, the highest rated episode of his show, unfortunately, was the episode where his now deceased wife, when she was diagnosed with lung cancer, despite the fact that she never smoked, she was dying of lung cancer. He brought her on the show. They had their moment there, and 2 weeks later she died. He took I think it was like a month off, and then came back to the show, and ever since then he's had to do all of these kind of parlor tricks and really kind of Jerry Springer-esque kind of shows that kind of tanked his ratings. People really weren't paying attention to it. So this was his big comeback during sweeps. The network executives are there in attendance. People are watching him. His producer's on his butt about making the show successful, and he really wants to make the show successful. It's happening on Halloween night, and his show, The Night Owls, is going to now feature some very paranormal things. One of the first ones is this medium who kind of seems like he's a fake, and they kind of leave that kind of up in the air. The character's name is Christo, and it's played very well, a little cheesy, but it's that whole Sylvia Brown thing, if you remember from the Montel Williams show, where they would go to the crowd and, oh, I see is there a Dwayne? Does anybody know a Dwayne or Dante? And, oh yeah, it's Dylan. Yeah, Dylan, that's what it was. That kind of thing. And then, it was wrong with one, but then there was an audience member, or two audience members actually, that did have somebody he seemingly connected to. We find out later on that was kind of a plant. Or not so much a plant, but it was a little bit of a deception, because they had answered a questionnaire earlier on before they came on the show, and that's where he got the information from. Now, this is also tempered as we go through this part of the show. Right as soon as we go to commercial break, Christo starts getting really weird. His eyes roll in the back of his head, and he starts talking about Minnie or Millie or whatever, and a man who's unmarried that wears a wedding ring. This is a reference to Jack himself. Again, as we mentioned, that Jack's wife had passed away, and he's still wearing his wedding ring on the show. Later on, we bring in this other character named Carmichael, who is a former magician. He was formerly like this psychics and whatever, but he's all about sleight of hand, and there's a scientific reason for this, and he's debunking, and this is based off of real life character, a real life person who did go around in the 70s and 80s debunking a lot of these magic tricks and stuff. But he's a character on this show, and he's debunking everything. He's debunking what's going on with Christo. Things go a little bit awry as Christo winds up projectile vomiting black vomit on him, as whatever demonic spirit apparently seems to be taking him over again. Now, it is to be noted that during the show, as we are watching it as if we're watching the actual broadcast, but intercut in the commercial breaks are these black and white behind the scenes footage of what's going on in between the segments of the show, where we see a lot more of the personality. We see the pressure that Jack is under. We see Carmichael questioning things and him having a problem. There's also Jack's kind of his sidekick, I guess would be the name for this character, but he's kind of like, no, something's wrong here. Gus is not feeling this stuff. He wants out of this. Half the crew wants to leave the show because they have a feeling something really weird's going on, and they find out something really bad actually happened to Christo, and that they probably should discontinue this thing. However, we do have June, who comes on to the show. She's the author of the book, and she is also the caretaker and the psychologist of this young girl, who is kind of the crux of everything, young Lily, who is brought onto the show. She's supposed to be possessed by a demon, and things continue to spiral out of control from then on, as we are left with the question now, while we're watching the show in real time and seeing the backstage stuff, how much of this is real? How much of it isn't real? Is this girl possessed? Is she not possessed? Is Carmichael right? And what does this all have to do with Jack? What does this all have to do with the Grove? What does this all have to do with Abraxas, which is apparently the demon that is possessing this little girl? And there are a lot of misdirections in the show. There are a lot of hints earlier in the show. There's a member of the audience that stands out a little bit. When Lily comes onto the show, she shakes Jack's hand, and he's impressed by how strong her grip is. And we are taken on this ride that I became fully engrossed in. I personally really like 70s horror. There's something about the 70s, as I mentioned before. 70s is probably a cursed decade in my opinion. And anything coming out of the 70s, especially 70s horror films kind of creep me out. I think it's kind of the way those movies looked. It might be the fact that I was really young when that happened, and most of the horror movies that I happened upon as a little kid in the 80s a lot of them were from the 70s. So maybe that all plays into that for me personally, but I do think there is an aesthetic of seeing that aspect ratio, the grainy footage, the setting, the casting, the hairdos, because they get that all perfect on this movie. Everything except the in-between credits, which I'll talk about in a second as far as this AI controversy about this movie, but all of that contributes to really putting you in this story, in this film. And yeah, some parts are cheesy. Most of it is well acted by the crew. There's some special effects that don't quite work. Unfortunately, part of the climax of the movie, there's some special effects that I wish they had just kept it to practical, and it probably would have worked better. But overall, this movie was a real thrill to watch if you like being creeped out. I was creeped out by this movie. I was watching this movie during one of those weird midday storms, and then I went outside to take the trash. Paused the movie, went outside to take the trash out, and the sky's all orange, and I'm like, I'm getting a little weirded out right here. There's thunder going on in the background, and I'm watching this weird ass movie. So, but obviously I'm still here, so everything's good. But I like this movie. I really do suggest watching it. There's a lot of little Easter eggs in here. It's not holding your hand through it. The ending, I thought they were going off the rails a little bit, but they brought it back, and the ending actually makes a lot of sense and just leaves you feeling that you've watched something that's kind of weird, a little creepy, but was brilliantly done, even for some of the shortcomings that happen with the movie that's not perfect. And I'm not going to get too far into it. I'm going to let you guys if you haven't seen the movie, kind of go into and watch it yourself and put the pieces together. You do have to, I would pay attention to it, because there's a lot of little subtle things that they kind of nest throughout almost every single scene in this movie that kind of explain the ending. And you will be left watching this movie and then kind of go, that ending kind of made sense. But let's talk about the AI controversy. There was a controversy about AI in this movie. The problem with it was that some of the scenes, in between scenes, between the commercial breaks, they'd have these little tags, which you used to see on old TV shows in the 70s and 80s, especially these late night talk shows. You still see them today with like Dr. Phil and stuff. The like in between title cards before and after commercial breaks. The controversy is that the filmmakers used AI to create these, where they could have easily hired an artist to do this and paid an artist. And this has caused a lot of stink amongst a lot of people. Some people think it's not a big deal because, hey, it's just the cards in the show. Why spend the extra money on that when they could have spent it on other things in the show? There was a boycott of the show because the people who were against it were like, hey, you can't do this. It's like, you can't give this little step, because this little step will lead to bigger steps, which will kick people out of jobs in the filmmaking world. I kind of see it in both ways, but I do think this is a discussion for later on that the creative community and the filmmaking community has to have. When is it appropriate to use AI? When is it not appropriate to use AI? That side story aside, it does not take away from the fact that this film is one I probably will watch again come around Halloween. I probably will be adding it to my spooky movie collection of movies that I will watch over and over again. At the end of the day with this, though, even though this is set in the 70s, I did find myself relating to this in modern day times, especially being a YouTuber. There are a lot of YouTubers, gaming YouTubers, 6Erican comes to mind, and the whole thing with Logan Paul and the suicide forest from several years ago. There is a question in this story and in this movie about the price of fame. And, you know, it goes along with the kind of the thought that anybody who's rich and famous, they must have sold their soul for it, which is not true. But there is that thought that a lot of people they had to do shortcuts to get there. And so there is a little bit of a meta truth to this, maybe not so much a demonic entity, but what humans will do in order to achieve fame. And I do see that again, like I said today, with a lot of the social media crowd, with YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, a lot of people doing very questionable things in pursuit of fame and fortune. And in some ways you could say it's, even if it's not a intelligent demon doing it, it is maybe the demonic side of humanity that is pushing us there. And what are we giving up, and what are these people giving up to seek that fame and fortune? Again, even though it was set in the 70s, this whole story is relevant to today. But I want to know what you guys think. Let your voice be heard in the comment box below. Have you seen Late Night with the Devil? Have you heard of it? Are you interested in it? And for those of you who've seen it, let me know what your thoughts are. Until next time, I will see you here for more news, rumors, and reviews on the Rantin Review Entertainment. Have a good day, if you can.